This is a touch sensor. It senses or triggers whenever something touches it, like this. Usually we put in a long piece to make it easier to touch stuff. So now that we know what the touch sensor does, let's see how it works in the program. Okay, so now we're into the program. So to use the touch sensor, you have to use the third bottommost block, a block that's called the wait block. So over here you can see that there's 6 different subcategories: time, touch, light, sound, distance, and color. So since we're using the touch sensor, use the touch one. So this is the wait block with the touch sensor. So over here you can see 3 different actions: pressed, released, and bumped. If it's pressed, that means that the touch sensor will do whatever action once it's pressed. If it's released, it means that it'll do an action as soon as the touch sensor is released. If it's bumped, it means that the touch sensor has to be touched and released, pressed and released, which is the same thing as bumped, and then it'll do something else. So what is the wait block in general? You can think of the wait block as an until block. So what do I mean by that? Well, basically by until I mean that it'll do whatever action is before it until this touch sensor senses something. So let's say I want the robot to go forward, hit a wall, and then go backwards. So for forward, you would put a move block forward right here. Then using this until, it'll go forward until it senses something using the touch sensor. Yep. And then you want it to go backwards. So backwards. But here's the tricky thing with this. You want it to go forward however much it needs to, over hills, over seas, in order to get hit by a wall. So you need this to be unlimited because you're going unlimited. You're going forever until you hit a wall. Okay? And over here, you can see pressed, released, and bumped. So generally, we're going to be using pressed because in this case, if you're going forward and you're going to hit a wall, it's going to be pressed, but it's not necessarily going to be released, right? If you're going forward, you're going to be grinding into that wall, so it won't be released. So that's why pressed is what we use, because that means it'll do the action. After it, it'll immediately go to this one as soon as it's pressed. So let's read it from the beginning. So it's going to go forward forever. It's going to be over here, it's going to sense using the touch sensor the wall, and as soon as it's pressed, it's going to go backwards. Yep, and that's it for the wait block using the touch sensor. Okay, so now that we know how to use the touch sensor in the wait block, we can also use the touch sensor in the loop block. So first let me delete everything and let's go to the loop block. So if you've forgotten, here's a little refresher. The loop block basically repeats whatever is inside it. So if you wanted to go forward and backwards forever, you would have it here on forever. But there's also some other categories. For this one, we're going to be using the sensor, the touch sensor, of course. And of course, so over here it would be touch sensor. And what do you think that means? Well, basically what that means is that this loop will go forever. It'll repeat these, sorry, this is meant to be backwards, forward and backwards. So anyways, this loop will go forward, this loop will keep on going forward, backwards, until the robot senses something using its touch sensor. So one thing to keep in mind is that the ports are really important. Make sure that your touch sensor on the robot has the same port as the one you put it in the coding. So over here you can see that it's on 1, so you'd have to make the robot port for the touch sensor on 1, be on 1. Same thing goes for the wait block. This also has a port, so again make sure that it has the same port. So over here you can see it's also on pressed, and that's how we like it. Let's review what we've learned so far about the touch sensor. We've learned that the touch sensor senses if the robot touches anything. There are 3 ways it can sense something touching the robot. There's press, release, and bump. Finally, there are 2 ways you can use the touch sensor. You can use it in the wait block and loop block. And that's it for this lesson. This has been Divya Virpaneni, and I'll see you in another lesson.